Madison, I think he referred to me as being one of those crazy runners. So naturally, I don't think I'm crazy, maybe just slightly unhinged. So, but just because of that point, I'm going to go ahead and start you off today by telling you a story about running, because like most of my spiritual thoughts, they do come to me when I'm running. I know it's kind of crazy. You think, but if you're out there running for an hour, hour and a half or something like that, your mind has to do a lot of thinking. So this was back in February is when this happened. I planned to run from church on a Sunday morning, so I planned to run from church. As soon as we got out of here, I was going to run to Mom's house to try to squeeze in some extra training before an upcoming race that was coming up in April. So, every minute you get counts with 3 kids and that kind of deal, so you just try to work it in where you can. Despite being a bit sore from the long run that I had the day before, I was actually having a really great run that day. My pace was strong for me. It seemed like every song that came on Pandora was a good song for me to run with. I wasn't having to click through anything, so I was just kind of focusing on running. The weather was finally above 50 degrees. Now keep in mind this is in February now. I'm wishing it was back below 50 degrees. So I'm running along, I'm thinking about my pace, and it was going much better than I expected. Managed to actually make it across the Dardanelle-Russellville Bridge as I was heading into Dardanelle, and you know what? There were at least 2 or 3 cars that actually, out of about 80 cars that crossed the bridge when I'm running across it, not crazy, slightly unhinged, okay? That's it. So as I'm running across the bridge, at least 2 or 3 of these cars moves over into the interior lane so that I'm not fearful that I'm about to take a 100-foot swan dive into a pretty icy Arkansas River. So that was very fortunate. So nonetheless, I managed to make it all the way across the bridge, okay? No incident. It was great, came across, no big problems. In fact, as I'm kind of on the downhill slide there, one of my favorite songs comes on as I kind of arrive back to the safety of those wonderful the downtown Dardanelle sidewalks that we've got. Those are, very safe. So I'm just trotting along, listening to my music, kind of pushing the pace. I'm even jumping curbs, kind of acting like a little kid, when all of a sudden, smack. My left foot didn't extend quite as far as it had on the 2,159 strides that I'd previously had. So when your foot doesn't extend to where it needs to, it causes a whole myriad of problems. My right foot wasn't quite ready for its turn to land, so naturally I did what any of you guys would have done. Don't laugh. Okay? No laughing. So I did what any of you would have done, and I hit the ground faster than Peyton Manning avoiding an open field tackle. Guys, it was horrible. And let me tell you, when you're falling as a grown man, it feels like the world slows down to about 1/10 speed. Okay, you kind of feel like Spider-Man or like Neo from The Matrix when you're just kind of, oh no. You can see it happening. And so, of course, my hands go up, my cell phone goes flying, and I skidded for what felt like 20 yards. But, of course, because I'm a very nimble and athletic person, I hop up off the ground as fast as you could possibly imagine. I mean, I had to make it look like that was an intended forward roll. So I don't remember what I was mumbling to myself, but I'm sure Mom wouldn't be proud of what I was saying. I was pretty upset about falling. After all, this was a really good run. Things were going well until they weren't. So nonetheless, I took a moment to just kind of assess the damage. I wanted to track down my phone, my sunglasses, and my headphones because those somehow managed to get detached from both my ears and my phone. So my hands, as I kind of look down, I managed to track these things down, gather them up, and I'm looking at my hands, and I've got some cuts and scrapes on there, so I'm bleeding on my palms. My left shoulder, crazy enough, because of that wonderful forward roll action I did, has a little bit of road rash on it along with my left knee, okay? There was a little bit of a problem though, because my left foot, you remember that one that didn't extend as far as I wanted it to? It had hit a piece of metal that was about 1 inch high off the ground. It just smashed into this thing, and the 3 middle toes of my left foot were radiating pain, okay? So I was pretty hot at this point. I'm mad and I'm sweating. Yeah, I know, 50 degrees. I'm sweating out there like crazy. Nonetheless, I managed to rally the King's men, put Humpty Dumpty back together, and decided that I'd just kind of continue on with my run, because that's what non-crazy, just slightly unhinged runners do. We just continue on after a fall like that, at least till I could determine whether or not I'd actually injured that left foot or not. You know, maybe it'll just stop hurting. So about a quarter mile down the road, I decided, you know what, my foot and toes, I think I'm a little bit more injured than I am just hurting at the moment. So I called Emily's phone because she was going to be driving my truck from church to Mom's house with all the kids and that kind of thing, and she was giving directions, kind of wait a little bit, you know, so that you don't get there too early before I get there. So anyway, but of course, you know, as I call her from my phone, she couldn't be bothered to answer hers. So what did I do? I mean, I've got no transportation. I've got another 2.5 miles to Mom's house, so just take off running again. So between the time, during the time that I'm between wincing from pain every time my left foot hits the ground and not so nice things I was frustratedly saying under my heavy breathing, I had this thought, okay, just this thought kind of came to me. And it was, do I want to tell my kids to be the kind of person that quits when they're done, not when it hurts? Okay, did you get that? Do I want to be the kind of parent that tells my children that you quit when it's done, not when it hurts? Do I want to tell them that? Or do I want to show them? So naturally, my phone rings right after having this thought. It was my wonderful wife calling me back because she realized she had a missed call from me. At this point, I angrily answered the phone, partially at the fact that, you know, she didn't answer when I originally called and I was in pain and trying to get a ride. And then mainly because I knew I was going to have to finish these last 2 miles with a set of toes that were now numb, tingly, and swelling. So I briefly told her what had happened and that I didn't need her taxiing services and hung up the phone. So, for the next 2 miles, this thought just kind of kept coming back to me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Now, I know my kids are probably too young to remember me, you know, crashing and burning on a run. I mean, it happens probably, I don't know, at least once a year, right? Probably something like that. At least once a year I'll fall. So they're probably too young to remember that, but really kids are impressionable, aren't they? They're even so impressionable that for about a month after the fall, every time I came home from a run, Magnolia was concerned enough to ask me if I had fallen. Now, this made Emily laugh every time she heard it because she thinks things like that are kind of funny when I fall. But for some reason, I couldn't get this thought out of my head. Now, not necessarily the whole thing about what do I want my kids to know about enduring obstacles, failures, and difficulties while they're pursuing their goals. It wasn't so much that I was concerned with that. While that is something, that wasn't what I was concerned with. I was more focused on what do I communicate to my kids through my actions? And even more importantly, how are they able to learn through them? So this kind of got me thinking about my relationship with God and humanity's relationship with God. Because if you go back about 4,000 years from today, you guys probably heard of this guy named Abraham, right? Old Testament founding father of what we now know as the Jewish, people. So, anyway, God reached out to Abraham. He began teaching Abraham, telling him about who he was and what was expected of him and his descendants. And he made him 3 promises. And one of those promises I'm going to focus on here is that he promised him that he would be a nation of many. That his children would be so many that they would outnumber the stars in heaven and the grains of sand on the seashore. So now let's fast forward another 500 to 600 years, and Abraham's children had grown to be many. So many that after a period of time, they actually became enslaved by one of the world powers at the time. It's Egypt. Okay, so Egypt had taken them into slavery. And at this point, God then sends this guy in to take his people out of slavery in Egypt. Sends a guy named Moses. You guys probably heard of him, one of the focal points of the Old Testament. So Moses wasn't a very good speaker, so naturally, what did God tell him to do? He says, hey, go and speak for me. Well, God has a tendency of doing that with people, taking people who don't think that they're very gifted at whatever it is, and then he uses them in that exact way. So I find that really interesting, but God told Moses what to do, and he told him what was expected, and he said, Moses, I know you're afraid, but I'm with you. And when you fail, I'll be there to do it for you. Kind of like a child tying their shoes. It's kind of like when you say, I want you to try. I want you to try, and if you can't, that's okay, because I can tie the shoes for you. It's going to be all right. So after a short period of time and a few plagues later, Moses is on his way with a group of a couple 100,000 or so Jewish people fleeing Egypt. So then after that, let's fast forward a little bit more, and God uses Moses to communicate his laws to his people. Right? You guys remember the Ten Commandments, Mount Sinai? God went up there, or Moses went up there, and God gave it to him. He comes down, breaks them, then he kind of goes back up, asks God to rewrite them. So anyway, ends up with the Ten Commandments, and then an entire set of rules that come to follow later in Leviticus. That he gives them a set of rules to follow, kind of an instructional guide, if you will. He tells them how to cook their food, what foods to eat, how they should worship, and what they should and shouldn't do to their fellow people. He even outlines a set of penalties and punishments for doing the wrong things. Kind of like a parent with their child. You know, God didn't always explain why there were rules. He just said follow them, right? Those of you that have had little kids, you kind of know sometimes it's just kind of beyond your capacity, beyond the child's capacity to understand why the rules are in place. So of course, over time, this set up a really, really vicious cycle of these people having rules, them failing to comply with the rules, being punished for not following the rules, then they turn around and obey the rules, are back in good favor with God, and then back to failing, and the cycle perpetuated for many generations. So, what happens during this time of failure over and over again? There come to be a group of people over the next few hundred years that the most pious of the group, okay, your most, the rule followers, those rule followers wanted to protect themselves from punishment because they'd seen what had happened. So they started to police the rules themselves, right? Kind of like an older sibling trying to coach the younger to prevent them from going through the difficulty of disobedience, right? Because there's usually punishment for breaking the rules. I mean, it's pretty simple for these guys. The laws were right there written down and passed from generation to generation. All they had to do was study the rules and then do what they said. I mean, after all, God had told them what to do, right? So they knew. My wife's a teacher, Emily. She teaches 5th grade, and last year was her first year, technically last year now, was her first year teaching, and we had a baby right there in September. So shortly after that, she's teaching her first year in a new grade and has a baby. And it's the big fat one. You guys see her lugging around here. That kid. Anyway, so for her maternity leave, what she had to do, she had to spend a lot of hours developing substitute teacher plans because she was going to have somebody that was filling in for her for the 6 weeks, I think, that she was out. She was going to have somebody in there going over her plans for her. So, being the awesome teacher that she is, I'm sure that the substitute teacher was able to walk in, pick up those perfectly outlined plans, and the kids probably barely even knew that they had a new teacher, right? No, definitely not. It's a big difference, isn't it? I mean, do you think you could just walk into the classroom if you're not a teacher? Do you think you could just walk into a classroom, pick up a piece of paper, read the notes, and then execute a perfect day of teaching? Well, let's say even if you had enough time to review the notes several days in advance, do you think you'd be that adept at teaching a classroom of 5th graders? If that were the case, none of the teachers in this room would have had to gone to college, spend hours observing other teachers, then numerous hours as an intern to even have some kind of idea of what would be required of them in a given day. You can ask Thomas here about his experience in taking on a new job and a new role as a lender, where he's getting to do some commercial loans. And he's been working in this role for about 9 months, is that right? so about 9 months now, and really is doing a great job. Just don't tell him I said that, okay? Nobody. So he's been doing a great job. But, however, on his first day of work, I said to him, okay, man, here's you go. Let me break this down for you. I'm going to run it out for you. To get a loan, you just need to build trust with your prospects, okay? Well, after you develop the relationship with them, you keep going there. You just have to wait for an opportunity. And then once you have an opportunity, you're going to need to collect 2 to 3 years of tax returns and spread all their financials so that you can run a cash flow analysis of your borrower and any related entities. And then you can decide if you want to do the loan after you do that stuff. So pretty simple outline detail deal there. Hey, just do that stuff. Well, once you determine that you do want to do the loan, you need to order title work, appraisals, file a UCC on their FF&E, et cetera, et cetera. You guys get the point? There's a lot of steps in this, right? Well, seems pretty simple, doesn't it? Sure, he's just been explained how to do this. How well could he be expected to do the job? Now, I know sometimes it probably feels like that's kind of what happened, but it'd be difficult. He was just given a defined process to follow. He should be able to close that loan in 2 weeks, probably, right? At least that's what the borrower thinks. And those instructions, while they're correct, they can be however detailed, still couldn't be expected to do the job with any kind of success if all he had was just kind of a base knowledge of the steps to take. Even if I wrote down the steps and he studied them for hours, it still wouldn't have prepared him to do the job. How about doctors? You guys know about doctors? Anything about their education? We've all got this little rectangle thing, right? It's all tethered to us. We can't really leave the house without it. You guys know we can Google any symptom, right? Come up with 47 differential diagnosis, narrow those down based on any number of additional symptoms that we may be having. Find the most common treatment methods. We can review the outcomes of each of those treatments and then call in our prescription to the local Walgreens, right? No, of course we can. Physicians spend at least 4 years educating themselves on the human body, common diseases, the most common presentments of those diseases, and you still wouldn't want to go see that doctor, right? Because after that, even the shortest residency is going to be about 2 years. They spend at least 2 years working these grueling 12 to 18-hour shifts where they are totally immersed in clinicals, where they are working and learning with and from other doctors, where they have the capacity to get some hands-on experience. How many of you guys would trust a fresh med school graduate with a, 10-hour brain operation if all they had done was read about the procedure? I know I probably wouldn't. Okay, so back to this thought. My brain just kept running around this idea of learning. How well do we really learn something just by being told, reading, or even studying? Even the brightest, the best, the smartest of us all need to be shown how to do something, right? So let's take a look at what Jesus had to say about it. If you want to follow along, I think it's going to be up here on the screen. If you want to read along, it's going to be in John 14. We're going to read through verses 5 through 12. There we go. So just kind of brief intro on John 14. This is right after Jesus tells his disciples that he's going to go away and he's going to prepare a place for them, and then he's going to come back for them, okay? So the disciples at this point are quite distressed, okay? There's some anxiety in their hearts at this time. And we'll start at verse 5 here. Thomas said to him, "Lord, we don't know where you are going, so how can we know the way?" Pretty typical Thomas, right? Questioning. Jesus answered. You guys are probably pretty familiar with this one. "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And if you really know me, you're going to know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him." So then Philip replies, "Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us." Jesus answered, "Don't you know me, Philip, even after I have been among you such a long time? Anyone who has seen the Father has seen, or anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, show us the Father? You guys get that? Jesus saying, Philip, man, I just told you. How can you say that? You want me to show you the Father? Man, that's what I've been doing. Verse 10. Don't you believe that I am in the Father and that the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing His work. Jesus is saying, do you seriously think this is all on me? Do you think I'm doing this by my charm, my personality, and my good looks? It's not at all. You're missing the point. If you're seeing me, you're seeing God work in me. You've seen the Father. Verse 11. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves. He's saying, look at my life, guys. Phil, look at my life. Look at what I've done. Look at what I've taught you. And you're going to understand you've already seen the Father. And so now we get to the punch verse here. This is the one that I kind of want to focus on. It says, very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I've been doing. Let's repeat that. So very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing. Okay? Jesus says, guys, I've been showing you how to do this. And if you believe in me, you're going to do the works that I've been showing you how to do for the past 3 years that I've been here. So very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I've been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. Jesus here is saying, guys, you have the rules. I've laid out their purpose, and I've spent the past 3 years showing you how to do the work. You know, God's intent back with Moses and the law, the law was never intended to be the end. It was the beginning of God teaching His people. Because just like in all forms of education that you do in life, you've got to have some book time, right? But like we all know, from those of us who went to school and then into work, you know that the book work doesn't exactly show you what it's like in the real world, does it? What you see in the books doesn't always apply totally. That's why you got to see it done. So it took Jesus coming into the world to show us that it isn't about the thou shalt not steal, but that we don't steal because it hurts other people, okay? In fact, you need to love those people so much that they want to give it away. You don't just invest in the relationships that you want for your own gain, but you invest in relationships for their gain. Because Jesus spent His ministry fighting for people who were underserved, who were pushed away. Jesus sought after people who'd been wounded, both emotionally, physically, spiritually, in every ways, because they'd been betrayed. He spent His time serving low-class workers, prostitutes, and people who were so unclean that they were forced to live outside of town. He used His divine power to heal people that were sick, even when everyone around them believed that God was punishing that person. So, if you think a guy like, say, Colin Kaepernick is hated by a lot of people for taking a knee during the national anthem, I'll tell you right now, it pales so much in comparison to what Jesus was doing to people's perception of what's right and wrong. Now, Jesus didn't do all these things to create a social change. He was doing it to show us. His disciples, the religious leaders, you, me, how we're supposed to live our lives. His desire for us was that we would truly know God. Not to just have some rules to follow or some boxes that we can check. His example transcends this whole social, this economic, and any kind of cultural change that we're going to have. At the very heart of his ministry was teaching us how to love fully. It's indiscriminate. You lay yourself out there. You go when you don't want to. You allow yourself to be hurt by people that you know are probably going to betray you anyway. So, if you get nothing more from what we've talked about here this morning, I want you to take this with you. Understand that you've been shown how to live your life, no matter how inconvenient you think it is. Jesus has shown us how to live our life. And I'm not great at it, okay? I'm not proclaiming to be better at this than anybody, because it's going to make us uncomfortable. Because God didn't just arbitrarily come to earth to go through a difficult life, to be murdered by those that hated him. He came to earth so that he could finally stop telling us what to do, and he showed us. So as you go throughout your days and the weeks ahead, live your life in a way that Jesus showed us to live. Get rid of the petty hang-ups we've got about things. Dare to love people that aren't loved. Look for opportunities to do what's right and not necessarily what's popular. And a big one too is quit worrying about what other Christians think of you, because it makes no difference. I promise you, Jesus infuriated those that were religious. It was daring. It was fully committed. And I'm going to tell you right now, if it doesn't make you a bit uncomfortable, it's probably not being done right. You should be struggling with it a little bit. So, with that, guys, thank you so much for being here. I love all of you guys, and I hope you have a blessed week. And I do pray that God works through you in the way that Jesus promised his disciples he would. At the end of that verse there, when he says, "And they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father." If you will, let's pray. God, we thank you